I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna make a Darksaber. If you know me at all, you know that I really like Star Wars. In fact, in the past, I've already made a lightsaber, and it turned out really good. I worked on it for a long time, and I was pretty happy with the results. But one thing I didn't like was how big the handle was. Well, now I want to make something called a Darksaber, which is another thing from the Star Wars universe. But this time, I'm going to start with the handle to make sure that I get its size and its fit correct before I move on to the blade. So to do that, I'm going to start with a piece of wood and start working it down to get something that fits in my hand that is generally the right size so I can get some dimensions, and then we'll head to the computer. Generally, I just wanted to figure out the right thickness and the right width so that I could hold it with two hands and it'd be comfortable. It may need to go down a little bit, and I think it may actually be a little bit too short. But from this, I can take some measurements and then go to the computer and start scaling the actual picture I have of this prop up to the right size to fit my hand. I could 3D model and 3D print this handle, but I want to try to make it out of wood if I can. So I've got all these measurements on here. I've got a drawing that I found of the hilt, pulled up in Illustrator, and now I can scale that drawing to meet these dimensions. I got my template finished up, and I cut it into two pieces just so I could fit it onto a single sheet of paper. It's about 14 inches long. Now I'm going to put this on a piece of wood and try to cut it out. I've got some basswood, I have a lot of this stuff, but it's also really good for carving. You can get a really nice finish, smooth surface on it, even when you're adding details. So I'm going to cut this down to a rough size that I'm going to use and then put the template on. I'm laying out this template on this piece mainly just to get the outside size of it down, and I could just measure that. But I wanted to have a template in place so I could cut pieces like this detail on the end and then start to mark on it, maybe even scribe in where these cuts need to be. These are going to be slightly down into the surface. And if I can mark where these are and measure them, then I can probably use the table saw to get a groove put in here on all four sides of the piece once I get it cut down. I've got the general shape cut out, but now that I'm holding it, it still seems like it's a little bit too thick, so luckily I've still got some flat faces. I can run it through the table saw and thin it down. Instead of routing in grooves for these little lines, I decided to just outline them, and so I'm going to use a knife to actually score the outline of each one of these boxes, and then I can actually fill in the inside section with paint. But to do that, I have to be able to transfer these lines to the other side. So I mirrored out my template. Everything is opposite, and then I printed it out again. So now I'm going to carry these lines over around the edge and then use those marks to line up the new template on the opposite side. Then I can go back and score all these lines before I take the templates off. I've got all the grooves cut in here, so next I need to make the guard that goes above this. There's a piece that sits out here at an angle and goes up. Now, I want to point out that I have no idea what I'm doing. I have not planned ahead, so I'm going to just try to figure out how to make that piece that can slide on, and that means the hole in it is going to have angled sides because it sits at an angle relative to this piece. So, I don't know, let's give it a shot. I intentionally cut on the inside of those lines that I drew so it doesn't quite fit on here yet, and that's because I want to make sure that it's a really, really snug fit. So since I've got the rough opening, I can take a file and go in there and file out each side and each corner to get it to actually slide around here and be really tight. Okay, so now it's a nice tight fit, but this piece is supposed to be at an angle, and it actually matches this angled line right here. So to do that, I'm going to take this off and file opposing angles on the inside edges of these two pieces, so theoretically it should be able to slide down and rest at this angle. I got that piece cut and fit on here, and I've got a good looking angle, although it doesn't have to be exact because this has only been an animated show, so I don't have anything really concrete to follow. But basically this piece is ready. We need to add this piece onto the front of it as part of the guard. So we're going to pull this off and sand these edges and glue them together. That glue up is all done, so now I'm just going to sand this down to get the angles right. The Darksaber has a black blade, but has white light that comes out around the outside. So I've got some different pieces of acrylic here that we're going to try to layer up to make that blade happen. I've got a 1/4 inch piece of clear. That's going to act as our core, and we're going to put some lights in it. Then on the outside of that, I've got 2 pieces of black that we're going to sandwich around it, and we can scribe in some markings on that black. First, we've got to figure out the overall shape of that blade so we can cut it out of the clear and fit it into the hilt. I've got the profile of the blade cut out, and it is kind of a weird looking blade, but this is how it looks in the shows. So now I'm going to figure out how to get this fit on the inside of this handle, which means I'm going to have to cut this handle in half and hollow out the insides. I started to use the table saw to make that cut, and then I realized that the kerf of the blade was actually going to take out a lot of material within this, which would make this thinner than it needs to be. So instead, I'm going to use the bandsaw because that will make a thinner cut. Now that I've got the hole cut in the end of this, I need to hollow out the inside so I can actually get the wiring and get the batteries and all that stuff placed on the inside of this. And to do that, I've got this in a clamp, and then I'm going to clamp this down to the table so it's nice and secure, and then use a router to kind of hollow this section out. Now we've got our pocket in here for the batteries, and these are going to be on one of the springs, so that should keep them in tight. I may need to pad the sides a little bit because I made the opening a little bit too wide. But this will connect a wire right here up to the LEDs that are going to start in this section, and that means we're going to have to put the LEDs in the middle of the blade. We're going to carve out a section on the inside of the blade to run the LEDs all the way up to the end, and then wrap that whole thing in black acrylic. So now I've got the blade split in half, and this LED strip is going to get doubled up and stuck on the inside of it. Unfortunately, it is wider than the plastic, so I'm going to have to lay it on its side. So I want to test it out and make sure that it's going to be bright enough, even laid down flat on the inside of the blade. I got a really simple strip of LEDs off Amazon to make this project really easy. The LEDs are single color, so we don't have to worry about changing colors, extra power requirements, and they run off of 3 AA batteries. Fortunately, there's also a switch built into this pack, so we have everything we need. We can take the switch out, we can take the terminals out, and fit them into the lightsaber hilt. You don't actually even have to solder anything. This comes out with the switch directly attached to one of the terminals. The other wire is attached to the other terminal, so you can put it on the ends of the batteries and you're good to go. But I am going to move the switch, so I'm going to solder it and just lengthen these wires so I can put it somewhere else on the handle. Now that I've got that blade cut out and the lights fit on the inside of it, I want to wrap the whole thing in black acrylic. So I've got 2 sheets of black. It's really thin, it's like a 1/16 of an inch thick. And so I'm going to lay out the blade on top of it and trace the outline and cut 2 pieces so I can put one on each side of the blade. Then we'll go back and glue it all together with the lights on the inside. Now I've got to sandwich these 3 pieces of acrylic together, and to do that I'm going to use special acrylic cement. Acrylic is kind of weird in that a lot of the glues you use for other things don't really work, so you have to use a very specific adhesive for acrylic. Now that I've got the 2 pieces sandwiched together, I'm also putting a bead of this adhesive where they meet on the inside to make sure that there's a strong joint, because I'm going to be beveling the outside edge with a sander to give the blade a bevel. I've got the batteries in place. The circuit works just fine. There is a little extra room here in the cavity from when I routed it out. So I'm gonna fill that with a scrap of wood, and that's gonna keep the batteries from being able to jostle around and come loose. I'm sitting here looking at this and just remembering that I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm kind of making this up as I'm going along, and I need to figure out how to fix the blade in place so it doesn't slide out. I also want to make it so that this section can open up so that I can get to the batteries to change them out. I need to mount the switch, and I need to figure out how to get this whole section on here and then this thing slid over it. So I'm really just gonna experiment, I think, figure out what works with each one of these little problems I gotta solve. I've gotta drill some holes, and I wanna countersink the head of these screws that's gonna be on the inside of the hilt. One of the cool things about these countersink bits is that you can loosen them, slide the actual drill bit in and out, so you can control the entire depth of the drill bit plus the countersink bit. I've got the switch mounted, and so this should work. Let's try it out and make sure that all the batteries are working and the circuit is in good shape. There we go. So now that we have this in place and working, we can go ahead and close it up and start painting things. Now I'm at a point where I need to put on this piece covering up the battery, but the top section up here doesn't need to come on and off, so I need to glue that down, which means I have to cut this piece in half. But I actually ran into another problem. Because I ran this through the bandsaw, I took out a little bit of material in here, which means that this is thinner than this hole, because I made this piece to fit this piece. So now I need to go back and cut this in half as well, and then glue it around the outside of the final width handle, and luckily that will actually hold this piece in place and make it easier to put on once it's cut in half. I'm going to use the same blade that I used to cut the handle, so the width of the kerf that I took out of that one will also be taken out of this piece. So I left a little bit of overhang here on this blade guard piece, and that should allow the end of this to kind of snap underneath it. So when I slide this piece, it can kind of go underneath and hook. That way I only have to worry about latching this end down, and I think I'm going to do that with some magnets. This is a really thin piece of material, so I'll probably glue the magnets here and then drill out an area, put in some metal so the magnets have something to snap to. One thing that's really cool about doing it this way is that you can actually lower and raise that screw to make sure that this magnet is perfectly flush with the top surface. Now I'm going to add some glue to these and then lay down the top piece and actually have those magnets glue to the piece that's going to cover this up. I put down some tape because I'm afraid that the glue that I'm going to put on here is going to squeeze out and actually glue these two pieces of wood together. So hopefully the tape will help separate those two pieces of wood while the glue attaches the magnets to the top piece of wood. The little magnet trick seemed to work out pretty well. This definitely holds in place and lays pretty flat. I'll probably have to trim out some of the glue squeeze out on the underside to make sure that it really sits down in there all the way, but this is good to go. So next up, I have a little trim piece that I need to make that fits over this section. I'm just gonna carve that out of wood and kind of glue it in place before we paint the handle. Now I've got to do kind of a tricky operation. I need to cut out a dado right down the middle of this so it can snap around the hilt. But I'm not going to swap out the dado blade, it just takes a lot of effort for this tiny little job. So instead, I'm going to set the fence to where it matches this line and then start to cut through the piece, making sure that I can flip the piece around on both sides and have the same remaining dimension on each edge using the fence. I got this piece cut down and shaped pretty well, and I realized that I didn't really take very precise measurements when I was making this gap in here, so it's a little bit loose. So I think I'm going to do the same thing I did on this piece, on this guard piece, cut it in half to remove a little bit of the thickness, and then just glue it back together in place. This video is sponsored by Weld Bond, which is a new glue that I've been using a whole lot lately, and I really like it. Honestly, this replaces several different glues in my shop, and it can be used to bond just about anything to just about anything. I've used this in the past when we were doing our bathroom renovation to actually put two tiles back together. It works really well. One of the best things about it is that it's non-toxic, it has no fumes whatsoever, it dries really quickly, and it dries clear. So it's great for a lot of really fine woodworking projects because you don't get that squeeze out of white or yellow glue. It's permanent and it's flexible. It's easy to remove on the outside of a surface if you have a little extra squeeze out. It's a really great glue, and it's competitively priced to a lot of the other stuff you would use in a wood shop. But luckily, you can use it for a lot more than just wood. This has become one of my go-to adhesives. I love having it around, and you should definitely go check it out. We'll have links down below. You can go find out all the details about Weld Bond. It's good stuff. Go check it out. I covered the handle with a couple of coats of a kind of gray metal and then put some clear coat over top of that, and it turned out pretty well. Now I need to wipe over this with some black paint so it goes down in these grooves just to make them pop out even more. I'll get to that in a minute, but the next thing is to actually bevel the blade. So first I got to take off all this wrapping and then go to the belt sander and give it a bevel. I want to try to get the sharpest part of the bevel right centered in the blade, so I'm taking a Sharpie and just drawing a line as close to the center as I can, and that will give me a point to sand to when I'm using the belt sander. I got the bevel put on the blade and it worked out pretty well. It's not super even, but it's not supposed to be an actual metal blade. It's supposed to be light and lasers and whatever. So it's okay if it's a little inconsistent. The important thing is that the clear sticks out a little bit past the black, and since it's sanded, it's going to diffuse the light. So theoretically, the outside edge of this should light up pretty brightly once we've got the batteries in here. But before we try it out, I want to go back and wipe some black over this handle and then wipe it off to get it down in these grooves. In the animated shows, this blade actually has some kind of like light squiggles and lightning and stuff happening in this black area, and my plan was to cut through this black acrylic. I did some tests with a Dremel tool to see if I could scratch through it to see if any of the light would come through. Unfortunately, you have to basically go all the way through the black acrylic to get any light through. So I'm going to abandon this idea so I don't mess up the surface here. All right, I've got that black paint on, so now we're gonna pull off this battery cover and put in the batteries and test it out. It looks pretty good. It has that diffused kind of lit edge, but obviously it's gonna look better in the dark, so let's try that out. And here it is. I'm actually really happy with how it turned out, even though along the way, several times I almost stopped working on this project. I didn't really have a plan going into it, and I think that slowed the whole thing down. I'm used to planning projects, but it goes to show you that if you just keep going on something and continue to problem solve along the way, you end up with a pretty good result. Now, I would like to figure out in the future how to add those little light squiggles to the blade, but I think it works pretty well even without that. And I am really happy that I ended up making this whole part out of wood instead of out of foam or 3D printing. It just forced me to figure out how to make this shape out of a material that I normally wouldn't use for something like this. Also, the electronics. Crazy simple, it's really basic, there was nothing special. In fact, you don't really have to have any special tools to make this entire thing. So if there's a prop that you've been wanting to build, but you think maybe you don't have a plan for it or it's outside your abilities, this is proof that you can just jump in and figure it out as you go. If you've got a project like that, I would love to hear about it. Let me know down in the comments. We've got tons of other project videos that you may want to check out of all different types. And if you're not subscribed, please go ahead and do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. See you next time. I've got the, what's that thing called? Oh yeah. Whoa.